Audible and visible?
Yes.
Good evening to one and all present here today. I, on behalf of the Women's Studies Center, Jesus and Mary College, would like to welcome you all for the second session of the certificate course module on the fundamentals of feminist economies and its renewed relevance in current times. Our second session is titled Feminist Economies and Neoclassical Orthodoxy. I would like to welcome our speaker for today, Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay. She is a professor in the Department of Economics, University of Calcutta, and former director of the Women's Studies Research Center, University of Calcutta. We are delighted to have you with us today, ma'am. I would request the members to kindly keep themselves on mute during the course of the session to avoid any disturbances and post your comments or questions in the chat box. Now I would request Professor Ishika Mukhopadhyay to kindly take over and enlighten us with her knowledge.
Thank you. And I have already shared with you 3 readings. So I think you can hear me. It's okay. So
Yes.
it's okay. Yeah. So I have already shared with you 3 readings. Now I'm going to switch off my video and share the slide and refer to the readings that I've already sent to you, right? I think the screen is visible to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So we are going to talk about feminist economics and neoclassical orthodoxy. So now, first of all, what is feminist economics? I know that you have just got the readings, but the readings will help you to understand. I'll refer to the readings from time to time. Now, both the feminist and the non-feminist views of the discipline of economics grew around 1960s. This version or this vision of feminist economics within the discipline of economics didn't exist earlier, although the questions of discussion of women, discussion of the discrimination, these were there in sociology and elsewhere, but within the discipline of economics, it is a development around 1960s. Now the discussion started with the microeconomics. That is when the reformulation was in terms of the microeconomics. And this was a microeconomics started with family or household as the basic unit. So the discussion on microeconomics of the family started during this period. The basic unit of economic analysis was still then the family or the household and not the individuals, because in economics, households take the decision and they make the choices. So what happens within the family never entered into the discussion. That it is the family which makes a decision, which buys to the market, and the family is a unit, is a seller, unit is taking the decisions. So what happens within the family? How did the family arrive at this decision or choices? Or why is the family behaving like this is not a purview of economics till then. The family enters as a black box where economics doesn't enter. The discipline of economics doesn't enter. However, why was this accepted? This was accepted. I'm going to talk to you about what is a neoclassical orthodoxy. This was accepted because it was thought that economics is not something which is dealing with uh, the intra-family behavior change or decisions or choices. Now, what is the change that was happening around 1960s is that there was visibility of women in employment, and this was being discussed, that women were seen outside the household. Women were also seen outside the household in the before 1960s, I was telling you. But the discussion that it is affecting, it is being affected and is affecting the economy or the transactions or the market. This idea came up during this period. Now, this is also a part of the development economics as a stream of development which appeared after the post Second World War, that is, liberation of the colonies like India, and the world was divided into First World, Second World, and Third World. So, when different contesting paths of development were being coming in, and development economics was taking a new shape, the discipline of development economics also earlier didn't exist within the neoclassical orthodoxy. But the question of women and the feminist views of the discipline of economics started developing. Now, so now we are going to look into what were the debates that emerged in the whole discussion. That how was the question of women or feminist economics coming out? It was a revisiting some of the old questions which were being discussed. Discussion of the household in the paradigm of division of labor. That is, how is this household or a family executing division of labor? What kind of division of labor exists within the household? 1960s was also the period of development of industrial capitalism. So women were seen outside also. But coming to that, what were the developments? Is that within the household or within the family, what was the typical division of labor? That when we take up family as a unit, we've overlooked this discussion of division of labor within the household. This division of labor means we are talking about the sexual division of labor, that is, division of labor within the family between men and women. Men are for production and women are for reproduction. So, production and reproduction, these are two broad areas identified within the household, even when we discuss family as a unit. It goes back to the discussion of Frederick Engels in 1884 with the famous piece, The Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State. That why is industrial capitalism, or how is industrial capitalism taking over from pre capitalist production systems? So the families were transiting to agricultural households, and this has been now renewed interests. That what was the origin of this division of labor? When did this division of labor really started? And if you were to revert to this division of labor, we find that this is fairly rigid. And there is a rigidity in the whole structure of this division of labor. And this is the basis from where family as a unit is acting as a deterrent to discussion of women or discussion of feminist economics, because we have to start from within the family. Now, in this piece of Engels, Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State, transition to agricultural households has been discussed from hunter-gatherer society. So, what happened in agricultural households? There has to be settlement. And when there has to be settlement, what happens is this: if there is settlement, then there has to be families and there has to be inheritance rights. That means acquisition of private property or the accumulation of private property. Now, this is a part of a pre-capitalist accumulation process. This was identified to be a part of the pre-capitalist accumulation process. So then the inheritance right was defined as part of patrilineality. Patrilineality reinforced patrilocality also. And this formed the basis of patriarchy. One of the pillars of patriarchy is, in fact, this is the strongest pillar of patriarchy, that this is how patriarchy is being witnessed, the visible outcome of patriarchy. So, construction of family as a unit of sexual division of labor. So if it is a part of pre-capitalist accumulation process, the accumulation process is to be definite, and the accumulation process is to be perfect. So female labor formed the reserve army of labor. That is, the female labor generally do not go out and participate in production. That is, it is not common for the female labor to go out and participate in production. They participate in reproductive activity. But when the family is in distress, it's a reserve army. So it is released. This reserve army is released to add to production. So as we see, this forms the breadwinner logic also for the males. And the income of the women is seen as a supplementary income, even if they work outside. So this was the visible outcome of patriarchy. So within this family, these debates were outside the purview of economics. That means outside the purview of the all economic activity of the state. Now, how is the state involved? Because state is involved in the fact that state have laws of inheritance. And inheritance rights are such that so that it keeps the private property within the family. So you have to define a family. So that means you have to define the narrative of it's a based on it's a heteronarrative binary family. And women are to kept mostly indoors. Why? Because maternity is not defining the property. Paternity is defining the property. But to know the paternity, the virginity of the women has to be mapped within the family. So what happens in within the family is allowed. So property has to be retained within the family, but what happens outside the family is not to be allowed because then the property will go outside the family. So the setting up of these state laws and the setting up of the institutions as a patriarchal institution was set up. So this was stated in the 1884 Frederick Engels. Once in the 1960s, this division of labor debate came in. This paper, this piece was revisited. Again, the whole question of family and household came in. And here comes up how this has affected the neoclassical economics. So as you can see, the family and the sexual division of labor, this discussion of the family started with the disintegration of primitive society. Primitive society was also having this primitive accumulation process. But now, if it is a transition to a capitalist society, just in the beginning, it's as the primitive society, it is there in the primitive society, increased more with pre-capitalist production units. So formation of agricultural based households as units of pre-capitalist production units. And this formed requirement of biology to be the basis. So anatomy and biology defined the sexual division of labor, although unrelated to each other. However, agriculture is now found one of the strong reasons of petrilocality. Petrilocality means the marriage is resettling or relocating women to the in-laws' house. That formed the supply of labor working as a sexual division of labor within the property or within the inheritance right located property family. Clearly, it facilitates this kind of location. So petrilocality also follows in. It has been more so with the agricultural communities or the history of agricultural communities. this is one of the ways in which now the debate is getting revisited. The requirement of biology or anatomy to be basis. So question of maternity and the birth of what is known on later as the care economy, what was in the 1960s discussed as home economics, and what is the whole debate on unpaid labor. So concept of patrilineage and patrilocality was there. Now patriarchy was there in pre-capitalist primitive accumulation phase in agricultural societies also. I sent you one of the readings on care economy. I'll show you those readings. I'll share those readings also with you today to get you acquainted with these. However, there are three different methodological frameworks to deal with this whole sort of mystery within the household. That is, what kind of work is this? Unpaid labor, the domestic work, what kind of work is this? Care economy or home economics or unpaid labor debate, how have they looked into, or what has been the philosophical basis of looking into this entire world of work? That is the kind of work that is associated within the family, washing, cooking, etc., etc. These kinds of domestic goods. Now, as you can see, all of us have been discussing this for a long period of time. But we couldn't make it a central part of the economics discipline till now. We keep on discussing care economy, we discussed home economics, we discussed unpaid labor, and it is the whole discussion of paid unpaid labor domain that is going on from years to years. We still have been groping with this. So this has been discussed in your readings very carefully. Now, what is neoclassical orthodoxy? Women in neoclassical orthodoxy. Birth of capitalism and neoclassical orthodoxy. Now, what does the neoclassical orthodoxy means? With the capitalism, industrial capitalism, the explanation of the industrial capitalism was based on neoclassical orthodoxy rather than in contrast to the heterodox position that is being taken up now in recent times. So I pose this orthodoxy as the other of the heterodoxy, which is one of the very dominant discussions when we discuss any kinds of division. That is, even if we discuss political economy, this was the decision. This was the division. Now, what are the assumptions of this neoclassical orthodoxy? One of the basic assumptions is Homo economicus. Homo economicus is the prototype of Homo sapiens in economic theory. The individuals are characterized by perfectly rational decisions motivated by self-interest. That is very much impersonal individuals, selfish individuals, self-seeking individuals, motivated by self-interest, pursuing rational decisions, are participating as buyers and sellers in the market. No doubt, this neoclassical orthodoxy starts with exchange. It doesn't start with what happens to production before exchange or how do you arrive at this exchange. It doesn't also look at two kinds of distributions with exchange. That is, how is this exchange being translated to distribution, or whether the products which are being exchanged in the market, which catches a value or the prices in the market, whether they're having the use values, and use values are identical with respect to all individuals, it's not explained. Though in Marx we had a division between use value and exchange value, that is, value in use and value in exchange, we find that both the concepts are collapsing in neoclassical orthodoxy, where there is an utilitarian explanation of the rational decisions. The decisions are rational as they are supported by self interest. Any self seeking individual can always do something, can always make a choice which will help the individual, and if it helps all the individuals collectively, it will help the economy to develop. So it's a philosophically, it's a positive rationalistic position. It's a positive rationalistic position from the philosophical point of view. Economics starts with exchange, and there is no difference between men and women, because when you're looking for self-interested individuals, self-interest seeking individuals, you are ruling out altruism, which is a characteristic feature of this kind of a structure, the patriarchal structure with the kind of embedded gender norms. Altruism is a part of the whole discussion. So women are hardly visible in the market. Women can only be accommodated in the microeconomic theory. In the micro theory, women were accommodated within the Homo economicus. It was also discussed. So this is a neoclassical orthodoxy, and it is very difficult to accommodate women within this prototype. But how has this been attempted? Which I'm going to critique the way in which it has been attempted. But before that, let me go through a curve. That how many women are being studying this neoclassical orthodoxy? Although now you're looking at heterodox position, but if you look at the pipeline for departments with doctoral programs and the percentages of doctoral students and faculties who are women, American Economic Association made a committee on the status of women in economics profession in 1972 and published the data. It's interesting to go through the data. Notwithstanding the discussion that those who have won the Nobel Prize, much lesser number of them are in women with respect to all subjects, but particularly with respect to economics. Now, if you look at the doctoral students, the first year students, you have this blue curve. Many students are, women students are reading economics, but the number is not rising. It has always remained within 30% to 35%. Now, this is the American Economic Association member institutes, 250 institutes, 250 universities. The data is for, and it's a whole series of data from 1972 to 2020, and this is What it is presented is the 94 to 2020 that I'm showing. The blue line is showing you the first year students. The number is more or less the same. Then you have assistant professors. These are the assistant professors, and if you find that it is rising, it has gone up. The proportion of assistant professors in women assistant professors have slightly grown up from 25% to 35%. But then the senior majors have started only from 2009 onwards. Before that, we did not have a senior major, and it is rising now. The senior major is rising now. New PhDs, yes, it is rising, but as you can see, it is again within this 25 to 30%. And this yellow is the associate professors, which is rising. Full professors are also rising. So senior majors, associate professors, and full professors, we find it's a rising curve, but it's still low from 5 to 7% to 10%. Still, it is much less. It's interesting to look at these numbers because it gives you where does the exclusion lies. So if now why is this survey important? The survey is not important just because that keeping women in economics profession would help to uh, propagate or help to push in and discuss more feminist economics or feminist perspectives in that sense. What we see is this: there is an exclusion, that is, if women feel that they cannot relate their discipline to the world around or to their life around, they do not intend to be a part of this profession. So the feminist second wave of feminist movements had the slogan of personal is political. So this is also a political structure where this institution is excluding women as there is lesser and lesser of similarity with the world around. Now, how was incorporation of women done in microeconomics? Gary Baker, who got the Nobel Prize in 1965, rationalized participation of women in marriage, family, in a microeconomic self-interest seeking model. Now, this meant that altruism was also structured within this homo economicus model, where Becker rationalized that it is women who take part in this unpaid job because these chores or these domestic activities or household work, which is outside the market, and men participate in this work because women have got comparative advantage in that. And this is even in the Industrial Revolution, we had this nimble finger logic of women, keeping women confined to the spinning wheels and not to the textile industries. So if you look into this, there is a rationalization of always that women can do cooking better, so it is better for women to cook. While if it is a market, the chefs, most of the chefs are men. So when it is coming to the market, this is getting different. So when it is coming for production, it is getting different. So Becker had this kind of a model of incorporation of women in the microeconomics. New home economics was also discussed during this period, where households still remained as the unit of participant in economic market, and they focused on economics of discrimination. That you can still retain the household or the family as a unit, but with a discrimination model fitted into it. And this visible discrimination was in the labor market. So, what happens within the home is an outcome of the visible discrimination was in the labor market. Here also, we find a justification of the sexual division of labor, which the feminist economists were critiquing. The equity studies were based on the value judgment that discrimination is unfair. Neoclassical orthodoxy was looking at the market as a value-free structure. Market is a value-free structure that you do not have value into it. But equity studies based on value judgment stated that discrimination is unfair. These contradicted the earlier analysis, where social discrimination is biologically determined and exogenous to the structure. That is a Becker's study that this distinction, this model, is an efficient model to run the household. And this is biologically determined and exogenous, although the experts in biology never told that anatomy determined productivity and anatomy determined the, the structure. The anatomic difference is a difference. And masculinity and femininity are related to the kind of work or pattern of work they try to do in future. So patriarchy cannot be changed or contested. Patriarchy was becoming stronger and stronger, given this patriarchy as a norm. This was then converted into a justification of cultural identification. Contradicts the earlier analysis where social discrimination is biologically determined and exogenous. So this was how the neoclassical orthodoxy tried to address the questions raised by feminist economists. So it tried to address, but the critiques stand up because the basic questions remain still unanswered. The basic questions, the basis or the fundamentals which was questioned by feminist economists, this fundamental was taken up to be predetermined and exogenous and was straight away given to biology or the anatomy, cultural norms, social norms. So the compass was different. The markers were different. So is gender a category? So gender and biology, this debate came up again and again. Because when we are trying to look up into this social division of labor or the sexual division of labor, gender comes up as a category. Is gender a category or a continuum? The contemporary life tells us that gender is a continuum. And It's not a category. So masculinity and femininity are the two poles. Androgyny is the word to be used here. So biology is not deterministic in that sense. There is a division between gender and sex. Is gender biological or social? So gender is definitely a social construction. The discussion is so much important to discuss when we talk about what happens inside the family, what happens inside the household, that predeterminism or deterministic ideas based on the biology or anatomy becomes irrelevant, stands out clearly to be rejected by the feminist economists. Why? Because the structure was different. The way in which neoclassical orthodoxy tried to accommodate women was something different. Rational separative homo economicus, they were looked upon as suspended humane in social. Because if you look into this suspended humane in the social, that is when they are taking part in the market, their behavior a, is like a suspended soul in the sea of the social, cultural, etc., etc., seeking self interest only and self motivation. Two alternatives are there. One is the assumption of some women in as a category in this suspension. So, like you have men, you have women also who are behaving like this suspended category. That is, they are also behaving like suspended human beings. Sorry, what the earlier slide. So you treat women as in the same category as men. And the knowledge system is generated by looking at the behavior in add women and star based knowledge system with difference quantified. That you only look women as a separate category, only with some altruistic behavior, which is not rational. That is in the rational human being structure. If you have somebody who deviates from rationality like that, so it is add women and star. For example, if you look into research on plantation workers, you just add women plantation workers. If you want to look into the wages earned by workers, just add women workers. So is it feminist economics? Does it look at the world in a different way? But feminist economics is trying to look at a different world view, of different look at a different framework of economics as a whole, uh, and it is not separated from social or political, because it is critiquing the whole proposition of rational economic. It is critiquing the proposition that human beings are acting as suspended humane, and human beings cannot react to society. They are not creators of this society. They cannot influence the culture. They cannot influence patriarchy. So human beings, so women are also taken to behave like accepting the norms of patriarchy. They cannot challenge the system. So this is the whole orthodoxy opposed to heterodoxy, where the resistance and resilience and challenges to the system are also allowed. And this is not irrational, and this is not illogical. So, what is the worldview that the feminist economics is trying to generate? Feminist economics is trying to generate the worldview that Women and men, masculinity or femininity are all derived by the society, social construct, economic construct, and political construct. So if you look at the kind of category analysis, it refrains itself from the category. It looks up at the system as an analysis. So, since I'm discussing feminist economics as posed itself vis a vis neoclassical orthodoxy, the details of that is to be found out in the survey that I have attached. I'll show you or share with you after discussion of some basic points. So then came up feminist empiricism, which was the basis, one of the bases of feminist economics. It started with the proposition of inappropriate inclusion of women in microeconomic model in a framework deviating from exact science. So this is the framework. Neoclassical orthodoxy is an inexact science. It is not a scientific way to look at the world. So if we build up upon inclusion of women within a positive rationalistic framework, it's an inappropriate inclusion of women in this framework, and it is deviating from exact science. Gender bias exists at all stages in the process of discrimination, but this needs to be documented. So it is deviating from feminist empiricism is deviating from the equity studies where discrimination is being the problem. And it's a kind of value question that equity must be there. Discrimination is unfair. Now, this discrimination needs to be quantified. So, feminist empiricism wanted to quantify the data, and as they wanted to quantify the data, they found that limited data is available as less visibility of women in the recognized spheres. For example, the male female wage gap. There was an understanding that with industrial capitalism, the wage gap and the discrimination would be liberated and there would be liberation with industrial capitalism. Even under neoliberalism, it was understood that more females will be seen, there will be feminization in the workforce. Bostrup in 1970 had the famous book Women's Role in Economic Development. There, Bostrup found that discrimination in work is systematic. Discrimination in market is systematic. It's a part very much internal to the system. So what did Bostrup show? In fact, Bostrup was surprised to find that even with industrial capitalism, with much evidence-based analysis in the villages, in the rural areas, in the urban areas, in the factories, in African countries, Asian countries, Bostrup found that even discrimination with respect to work. So this discrimination is very much part of the system. Even educated women are facing this under industrial capitalism, and capitalism is not liberating per se. But Bostrup couldn't explain why it did. It lacked the explanation power. Beneria, in a paper later on, explained it in terms of the social reproduction I think you already had a lecture by Jidosri on social reproduction, so you are acquainted with social reproduction, and I'm not going into that. So, this discrimination, this systematic discrimination, can be explained by social reproduction and in the analytical sense of the term. So, feminist empiricism tried to look into the evidence based analysis and evidence based explanations to look into this discourse. So, care economy. So, care economy, I told you about this care economy, home economics. This is the fuzzy area or the mysterious area in which we all stop our analysis. And this is where the entire debate stumbles. The feminist economy stumbled. In fact, the neoclassical orthodoxy stumbled, and feminist economy tried to look into, always keeps the eye pointed to this. So, this was visible with capitalism and neoliberalism, that even when this care economy is coming out to work, coming out in visible work, it is still facing discrimination. In fact, if you look into your country, the ASHA workers and the other workers, you face discrimination. In 1995, Beijing conference was the marker. And if you find the Beijing conference as the marker, UNDP followed the gender measures, the Gender Development Index, Gender Empowerment Measure, which are very common now as markers. In fact, in each year, when the Human Development Report comes out, these comes out. But the empowerment as a concept has been already a contested concept, because from 2010 onwards, UNDP is coming out with a gender equality index, inequality index. So again, the equity approach is coming back, a big question. So care work as unpaid work emerging from feminist critique of a universal breadwinner model. That universal breadwinner model, meaning that men are the universal breadwinner and women are adding to this. So, how do you locate altruism in the whole structure? Is altruism having any effect on it? Or does altruism dominate? Or is altruism dominating the gender norm and institutions, affecting the cultural norms? Care work exists both at home and outside, and accounting for the care work is becoming truly something which is we need to do. So now I share with you what are the care works in terms of um, one of your papers which I have shown to you. So yes, this is the Martha Nussbaum's paper, which no, not the Martha Nussbaum's paper, sorry. I shared with you three materials. This is the Nancy Folberg on the care work, the measuring care work. This is the paper which I shared with you, because the whole controversy was focusing here. Now, what are the categories and examples of care work which were markers which shook, which moved and shaped the neoclassical orthodoxy? One is this unpaid work. It is there in your paper. And it is told outside SNA. What is SNA? SNA is the system of national accounts. The way in which the country is measuring the accounts. So, direct care, like for children, changing diapers, elderly spoon feeding or bathing, sick, disabled spoon feeding or bathing, adults other than self, counseling, even self visiting doctor exercising. Indirect care is preparing food, doing laundry, cleaning. Elderly preparing food, doing laundry, cleaning. Sick, disabled also preparing food, doing laundry, cleaning. So this is also true for self and adults. Unpaid subsistence production, which is within the system of national accounts. The direct care is breastfeeding. Indirect care is growing food for own consumption, collecting fodder, food and fodder, meaning collecting wood or carrying water. This is for children, and the same for elderly, sick, disabled adults, and this is also for own consumption. Now, there are formal market structures and informal market structures. The participation of women in the informal market structures are much greater. It is widely being discussed. So informal market work is direct care, is family daycare, babysitting. This is the direct care. It can be same as elder sitting. Informal for the sick, disabled, it's informal but paid assistance to in the home. You know, all the home assistance persons who used to come. Indirect care is the domestic work area, the domestic servant, paid or unpaid family worker in small service enterprise. The same is true for the elderly, sick, disabled, and the adults. Even if it is a paid employment, you have care activities to be within the paid employment. Direct care is a child care worker, teacher, pediatrician, elderly care worker, gerontologist, sick, disabled nurse, nursing aide, doctor, adults, counselor, nutritionist, yoga instructor, indirect care, school administrator, clerical, food services, or janitorial, nursing home administrator, clerical, food services, or janitorial is elderly, hospital administrator, clerical, food services, or janitorial, sick and disabled. Now, post paid jobs not listed in other cells, which are assistance to adults other than self. So, as it is, if you look into the care work category, the fuzzy area is the most part of it. And even if you take the paid employment, this paid employment is also underpaid. There is a wage reading you find by Nancy Fulber. You find it's the essential structure of this measurement of gender empowerment and care work, which came in the post 1995. And if you look at the abstract, it should be clear to you that how do you define care and the measurements. This is a part of the feminist empiricism in the way in which to enhance the understanding of the impact of economic development on women. There are several approaches, several indices can be done. If you are done with it, it's also a quote of Diana Elson, who is a feminist economist and who is telling that the ability of money to mobilize labor power for productive work depends on operation of some non-monetary set of social relations to mobilize labor power for reproductive work. So as you can see, the sexual division of labor is influencing this measurement criteria also. So the fulfillment is an indispensable composition. So this is regarding your care work, and I come back to my slide that how is this taken into consideration. Now, I would move on with this to go to my later on discussions. That is, so the framework of feminist economics, the alternative framework, was to break this narrative, break the heteronarrative, and also break the binary of this care unpaid paid collective. So it looks at the world in terms of a continuum. It's not a binary. Even masculinity will undergo change in the renewed worldview. Neoclassical orthodoxy is obviously not the way in which we look at masculinity also. Actually, if you try to look at the structure, uh, feminist empiricism and feminist economics also tries to look into this alternative. One of the ways in which Martha Nussbaum has looked at this is in terms of a normative framework. So, apart from the contrast to normative, positive rationalist structure, entitlements and capabilities, that is, sense concept, it looks at a normative framework. In fact, the Rawls theory of justice, the justice, freedom, law, this structure looks at the normative framework. So, can patriarchy act as a gender norm? Is patriarchy a gender norm? Yes, it is a norm, but it's not given. One can contest. So, from a heterodox position, feminist economics is clearly taking a heterodox position where you have a continuum. Is patriarchy institutional? It is affecting the institutions. It is definitely affect the institution of knowledge, as we have seen in the neoclassical orthodoxy. So, where is social justice? So, is equity framework or discrimination only keeping social justice? That is, do we consider feminist economics only by looking at women per se, or do we look at intersectionality of caste, class, race, ethnicity, and other division, also geography, also location? So, social justice is also looking beyond the question of women and beyond femininity and masculinity, and also looked at things to be different. Where is social justice? Where is social justice? So, the justice framework is also being looked into. Growth versus quality of life as an indicator. So, economic growth is the focus of neoclassical orthodoxy, and quality of life is a focus of this feminist economics. Utilitarian framework is becoming inadequate. It is wrong. In fact, it is not only inadequate, the feminist economics from the heterodox position is challenging this orthodoxy and looked at it as a wrong framework, as inappropriate framework of dealing with this problem of the society. It is an inexact science. In fact, it's not the scientific framework to do it. In fact, according to Amartya Sen, economic growth inadequately captures the diversity. It is not going beyond the macro aggregative concept, and hence is in an inadequate structure of, sorry, it's a typo, inadequate structure of gender discrimination. So this has been discussed in the rights and capabilities approach, and I'll just show you the Martha Nussbaum's paper to discuss with you. I think this was my last slide. So let me share with you the um, other two slides to discuss, and then I move over to discussion of questions. So this is what Martha Nussbaum's paper is trying to look into. It's an example the way in which an alternate structure, a neoclassical orthodoxy, is being challenged from a normative point of view. So this is capabilities and social contract tradition. So let me. Uh, so this is capabilities as fundamental entitlements, sin and social justice, and this is the Martha Nussbaum framework. So it's from a social justice viewpoint. It's not an exhaustive. That is the only way in which feminist economics is done. But this is, of course, a point of ethics. And development as freedom is also giving you a kind of thought. So utilitarianism as a dominant economic paradigm is being challenged. And when this equity analysis is coming in, it also Sen also questions equality of what? So inequality re-examined is closely related to problem of social justice. Now, some of these differences are straightforwardly physical, but the others, the Nussbaums, in fact, Martha Nussbaum's Women in Economic Development puts it in a different structure. So, whether is this a Western tradition, what Nussbaum adds that capabilities approach is indeed a valuable way to approach the question of fundamental entitlements, one that is especially pertinent to the use of sex equality. Now, from an inequity profile environment, you cannot approach the question of equality. That is what Sen and Nussbaum is trying to tell us. So it is not Western, and it is very much pertaining to all areas. It is superior approach from the social contract approach, and it's a rights-based approach. Capabilities is becoming a rights-based approach, and is a social rights-based approach. Now, also they talk about the wealth and poverty of economists, as Marx so nicely put it. Now, economists means the neoclassical orthodoxy. So, in Women and Human Development, in this paper, Sen and Nussbaum was talking about the human rights approach. So, I have shared this paper with you, and it's a question of rights-based approach. That what are the fundamental rights? The right of free speech, right of free decisions, and women at home, whether what kind of right they have for political participation, and these also construct the structure of capability. So this is the paper. It also discusses Nozick's theory of justice, and Nozick version of the claim that Nozick's structure is there. This may also only that Nozick's account of property rights. It's also talk about inheritance and property rights. And so actually this is referred to Marx most of the times, and this is the central human capabilities approach. So this is one of the readings which I have shared with you. I've also shared with you uh, an overview of feminist economics, and this is a survey article which I'm shared with you. This article is by Hewitson. It's a survey of feminist economics, that what are the ways in which the feminist economics is being constructed and what are the questions being taken up. You will see most of the questions I dealt with are coming up from this paper, and this is a survey paper which is easy for you to understand. So please go through this and it will help you to understand. So this is a paper with lots of references, but the basic content is uh, on basic content. I think you should focus on the basic content. So with this, more or less, now the floor can be open for discussion. There are 15 minutes more to time. I think the floor can be open now for discussion. And I don't see anything in the chat box, but now if I think, how do you go about the question, Jessica? Srishti
Uh,
Pal.
yes, ma'am, you can take their question. Shrishti, go ahead.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful discussion. There was a lot that I learned today. When you were talking about the women in neoclassical orthodoxy and how women are seen as a category, which is not rational, and they are somehow that the man and the attributes of masculinity are rational, and that the woman is this other component which must be dealt with or appears sometimes in certain situations like the household. It does remind me of Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex, where she talks about how women
Exactly.
is seen.
Exactly.
And with that, ma'am, would you say that that knowledge at the end is also a social construction, that what is the theories that prevail at a certain point of time, or even in economics what was being taught was actually a narrative which was also prevalent in the society, because women were viewed as the other. They also became this other category in economics.
Well, Srishti, you are definitely right. This othering is a part of new classical orthodoxy, but heterodoxy, school from the uh, yes, open the audio. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes. So, from the feminist economics perspective, the neoclassical orthodox, it's challenging the neoclassical orthodoxy. It doesn't look at women as the other. It looks at women as part of the whole process. So, how can women be also a participant of the whole process? How can women be looked upon as an interior to the whole process? So, it challenges this otherization. This otherization brings upon this binary of masculinity and femininity, and obviously, this otherization is a part of the power structure. So it's a question of power, which I didn't discuss today because all uh, points are not to be discussed under this focus. I wanted to put the feminist economics heterodoxy vis-a-vis the neoclassical orthodoxy. So I think you're absolutely right. In fact, when even as an example, the normative approach of looking at the same economics, which is coming out of the developing discipline. So when it is coming out of that, you do not have the other when you are looking at that. You have intersectional deprivations also. So, how do you look at the deprived? Always looking at the other. Or how do you look at this as creation of the other? Then the question of creation of the other will never be questioned. You take other as the exogenous. Is this
Right.
is this okay, Srishti? So if you don't internalize the other, if you don't make it a part of an internal to the system, how can you explain this discrimination? So it's not a question of measuring discrimination alone, quantify discrimination alone. It's not a question of explaining a discrimination from the point of view of the orthodoxy, but taking a heterodoxy position.
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
So, any other questions, Jessica?
Ma'am, I can't see any other questions in the chat box. If there are any other questions, you can take forward. But ma'am, I think overall the session was extremely comprehensive, and we could obviously link it from the session yesterday that we
had on social reproduction and today this neoclassical orthodoxy. So, of course, connections could be made. Again, the readings have already been circulated, so you all can go ahead, read on the topics, and reach out to us in case you have questions. Uh, if you do have
Yes.
questions right now, please
So
feel free to unmute
actually,
yourself.
yeah, I'll just share the slide again, and if you want, I can even send the slide to you for help you to act as a guidance. So I can send this slide to you. So I'm just showing the slide on how to pointer to how do you go about with this when you are trying to understand this. So actually, if you go on with the slide, I'll just look into the slides. Yeah. So for these part of the whole thing, what is feminist economics and feminist orthodoxy? You look at the survey paper that is by Hewitson, the survey of feminist economics, and where are the debates? Many of the things you won't find in this three papers. They cannot be exhaustive, but as part of the certificate course, the readings need to be limited. So these discussions, patrilineality, patrilocality, all of these debates, these debates were there, but the structure is it may not be in the same sense, like the sexual division of labor, and this will be there everywhere, as you can see in the Martha Nussbaum's, as we can see in the measuring care work also. This came up. Now, women in neoclassical orthodoxy, this you will find in Hewitson, that is the survey paper. And there's an interesting graph that we got from the American Economic Association panel data. Gender and biology, all of these you will find in and these entitlements and capabilities, earlier you can find in the survey article as well as in the uh, measuring care work paper. And entitlements and capabilities, you move on to the Martha Nussbaum's paper, which is also a comprehensive paper. So the frameworks can be plenty. The heterodox analysis does not close your doors to only one kind of question. It never closes your doors. So it is not like this. So it never does it. Now, what it does is that it opens your doors. When you do a critique, the orthodox closes your doors of analysis. It restricts yourself to a strict framework. But heterodox analysis, like feminist economics, it opens your door. It helps you to allow more and more debates and discourses to explain this thing. That is exactly what feminist economics is doing too. Uh, Now that's why the feminist economics, it doesn't deal with only the question of women. It deals with the different kinds of economic analysis altogether. It tries to look at economics from a different perspectives, and it wants to change the narrative of the development economics. Also wants to change the narrative in terms of the heterodox position. So this is the worldview which the feminist economics generates. It goes beyond the question of women. I think that is the indication that feminist economics is giving you, that it goes beyond the worldview, it goes beyond this view of this orthodoxy, and it creates an alternative worldview of even discussing problems of other than women, even discussing men, even discussing society, even discussing other kinds of development issues. So it's not a question. It started with originally with the question of dealing with women, but if we try to look at this problem, the feminist economics has emerged as a discipline, has really changed the whole narrative altogether. So with this, I think I have given you the message of where the orthodoxy is to be hit and what feminist economics is trying to do and what is the purpose of feminist economics. So, are there any questions else, Jessica, or anything you want me to explain more?
Ma'am, there are no questions. I think Maya ma'am had also joined in. Miss Maya.
Yes, sorry to have joined now. Yes, it's no sorry because you're busy. No questions.
Okay, if there are no questions, we can go ahead with concluding the session.
So I'll send you this PowerPoint to Maya, and then I think it will be better for all of them to act as a guideline to look into the readings. So, is there anything else? If there is anything else,
You can probably close the session.
I would like to
thank
express
you
our
all.
heartfelt appreciation to Professor Ishita Mukhopadhyay for speaking to us about feminist economics and new classical.
That's all very fair, and you found that.
I would also like to express my gratitude to our WSC convener, Dr. Maya John, and all the WSC staff advisors for their help and guidance. Last but not the least, I'd like to thank all the members who have joined us today.
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Members, kindly note the third session for the certificate module is scheduled for tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. itself with Dr. Sona Mitra. We hope to see you all for our third session also. Thank you so much for joining in.